All right, everyone. Welcome to what today is June 8th, 2026 Transportation Advisory Board meeting. Stephanie, can I get a roll call?
Chair McKee Burrows is absent. Board Member Sterrett is absent. Vice Chair Wickland.
Here.
Board Member McInerney.
Here.
Board Member Zortman.
Here.
Board Member Palmino.
Here.
Council Member Popkin is coming in the door. We've got a quorum.
All right, then I'll read this statement. We acknowledge that Longmont sits on the traditional territory of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and other indigenous peoples. We honor the history and the living and spiritual connection that the first people have with this land. It is our commitment to face the injustices that happened when the land was taken and to educate our communities, ourselves, and our children to ensure that these injustices do not happen again. Can I get a motion to approve last month's meeting? Oh, sorry, I need to learn the whole button thing. You can do it now. Oh. All right. Well, here, we'll do a different one.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And that passes. Any communications from staff?
See, so we got one item from traffic engineering tonight. It's initial updates to our neighborhood traffic mitigation program. I won't read through the entire but basically this is just bringing it forward tab for comments for a future meeting. We're aiming for the standards update to provide official comment and kind of input for the new program. But the purpose of this revision is change to new neighborhood roadway safety outlined and draft criteria for selecting projects under the program. This program was intended to provide the City of Longmont residents with clear process for requesting traffic calming measures and roadway safety improvements outside of traditional CIP or larger projects. Staff traditionally has used the same policy that was enacted in 2006, the Neighborhood Traffic Mitigation Program, which requires petition of at least 5 residents, and then that enacts a traffic study, and based on the traffic study results, which we use the ADT, average daily traffic, and the 85th percentile of speeds on the roadway to determine whether that roadway qualifies for traffic calming measures. Over the last few years, we've seen a lot of resident comments about being too stringent. Over this program, we have not had any streets really qualify for traffic calming measures, which we can kind of identify as an issue when it comes to addressing neighborhood concerns and reacting towards safety, as well as living comfortability on local roads. So we're looking at to update that program and consider removing the data policy from that program and have a community threshold input. So right now our placeholder is 75% of the affected neighborhood would have to say yes to traffic calming measures. And that would initiate some more resident feedback, maybe some neighborhood meetings to really discuss what are the core issues, what improvements they'd like to see, and at what locations. So we're going to get rid of the data requirement where we measure the road, doesn't meet it, that's the end. We're looking at more of a holistic community approach. That's more different than other communities are doing. Most communities do the average daily traffic and the 85th percentile. Part of the comments we're looking for is looking at the threshold for the amount of people that need to say yes, or households that need to say yes to traffic calming measures. We want that to be more of a significant amount of the neighborhood, so it isn't a simple majority. It's a large portion that if we do install measures, there's a community consensus around it. It doesn't surprise people, and it's something that the community wants and will hopefully enjoy it for years to come, and we're not coming back a few years later to remove certain things because unintended consequences. as well as looking at our toolbox. So we'll present several different options for traffic calming measures, as well as applicable areas for local streets versus like collectors or local neighborhood streets. And that's my spiel.
Any questions?
Is that petition process, is that a formal binding agreement between the city and the community there? And does it, I guess, carry forward to other future homeowners that may be part of it? Or is it
So
less formal?
Yeah, so the current program, it's a city policy. So ultimately, it's up to staff's discretion, engineering judgment, to determine what is most appropriate traffic calming measure for that area, as well as what provides the most feasible traffic calming solution, but less impact to the overall neighborhood. So this new program, if a neighborhood does agree to it, that's why we want a larger buy-in, because people do move. People, relocate for different reasons. So if one or two people out of the 5 people that did ask for those measures, there's large enough community buy-in still where people do still want those measures, and we're not constantly fighting that simple majority.
Yeah, thanks.
Anyone else?
Kyle, are painted crosswalks considered to be a traffic mitigation measure under this program?
That's some of our conversations. A large portion to painted crosswalks is maintenance and availability of crews to install that particular thermoplastic. So if we do install things, it has to be for a reason. So we do want that buy-in and have the reason why things are installed. But part of this program is to reevaluate what options are available. So painted crosswalks, maybe intersection improvements, more minor intersection improvements, bulb outs, bollards, stuff of that nature.
Yeah, I would suggest that the city consider a land use based threshold for painted crosswalks or thermoplastic crosswalks. In other words, if there's an intersection adjacent to a school, adjacent to a park, adjacent to a senior center, adjacent to a hospital, it gets crosswalks established and maintained without an engineering study and without neighborhood participation.
Yeah, and we're possibly planning to bring this traffic mitigation study for like formal comment from the standards, because that fits very well into our street standards update as well as traffic calming. Particularly for this program is for neighborhoods, so really residential facing streets where people usually live. Otherwise, we would looking for standards updates as far as Vision Zero, safe routes to school, which will encompass some of those public gathering places.
All right, well, I'll bring that up again when we talk about design standards. Thanks.
Perfect. And if you guys have any future questions, comments, please email them to Steph. Then we can get them all aggregated. I'm sure a lot of people will have the same questions, and then we can provide some maybe more useful resources ahead of time. So makes those conversations go a little bit smoother, and hopefully you can answer the question holistically instead of shooting from the hip.
All right, thank you, Kyle. Next up, bike parking standards. Mr. Ben Ortiz.
Hello again. My name is Ben Ortiz, transportation planner. Wrong one. Good evening. My name is Ben Ortiz, transportation planner. So at the last meeting where we presented on this item, the TAB asked me to come back and share what had occurred at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. So at that meeting, which took place on May 27th, we presented the bike parking ordinance to them. And I just say, out of full disclosure, we removed the long-term bike parking provision from the presentation to them. We decided to take that approach because we feel that it will be more palatable and easy to approve, and that we would later take up the long-term bike parking provisions with the TDM program that we're going to be developing in the not-too-distant future. So, again, we presented the bike parking to the TAB, and they were given 3 options. The first was to recommend approval to the City Council of the ordinance as written without any amendments. The second would be to recommend approval of the ordinance with conditions. And then the third would be to recommend denial of the ordinance, so to recommend not approving it at City Council. And so they chose option B, which would be to recommend to City Council that they approve the ordinance with conditions. And so they gave us some, basically some high-level recommendations, and they asked us to come up with the language for that. And the first was to amend the cargo bike requirement. They felt that was a little bit too onerous, but they weren't able to give us anything really specific to like do 1 out of every 30. They weren't able to do that. They just felt like we were asking for too much cargo bike parking. They also wanted us to clarify the outside dimensions of the covered bike parking. Presently, we only have the width provided, which shows covered bike parking 4 feet on either side of the rack, but we didn't address the ends. And so they want us to show an envelope, provided dimension for the envelope around covered bike parking, which we said we could also do. The third would be that they were seeking clarification on the 100-foot separation from the land use that bike parking serves. And so they wanted us to clarify with respects to developments with multiple entrances, and like which entrances are the ones that are served, and how do you deal with like detached housing. These would be like condos or townhomes, as well as mobile home parks. And then lastly, they wanted us to eliminate the requirement for short-term rentals. And so those are the four items that they wanted us to address. And so we are going to prepare the planning and zoning resolution language for that. I'm going to confer with Cammie here, and then, of course, the planning director and possibly the city attorney's office before we push that forward. And Cammie, did you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I think Ben and I talked about that. Once this PZR formal response to the 4 conditions that they approved it on, we'd bring back that formal language for you all to see again. Because P&Z has approved it, we can't change anything else at this point based on that, but you are open to give us comments on how we might best develop these 4 conditions out to the best of our ability and get your feedback on. But once that's approved, or once we get that PZR, go back to them and they approve it, that's when it'll be formally taken up to City Council to adopt a short-term parking policy. So just wanted to clarify sort of the process flow we're in right now.
Okay. Can I have a question first, Popkin? In terms of what we were presented a couple months ago, has much of the language changed before it went to P&Z?
No.
Okay.
No.
And that's one reason why as staff, we decided to break short-term parking apart from the longer-term parking, because when we presented it to you all as TAB, everyone was pretty much generally okay with the short-term parking. So to avoid that delay in getting approved, we decided to break them into 2 separate policies to bring forward instead of 1. Since the long-term parking was also where you had the most discussion and felt like if we want to align it with our TDM policy work and other things, maybe it's smarter to break these out so we can get the positive movement on the short-term parking pieces. So that's why we made the internal staff decision to break them apart and only take the short-term parking to P and Z.
Okay, it makes sense. Councilor Popkin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to also add on to that and saying, yes, there's the formal P&Z resolution that would be recommended to council, but part of my role here and as the liaison to planning and zoning would be to represent both board input into that. So in the event that there is some disagreement or that there's just additional comments, I'm going to make sure to bring that forward to the council discussion when we get to that point. I think it will be a little bit more straightforward to have the short-term bike parking focus for that discussion and then kind of have the next discussion when that's ready. So thank you. And thank you, Ben. I know you've been circling the wagon on a number of different advisory boards with this, so appreciate the work.
Sorry, Ben.
Oh, and I'll just note if the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting is recorded, obviously, just like these are. So if you did want to hear, I think it was about an hour discussion on the 27th that they had, hour and a quarter on that. So if you want to hear some of their questions and clarifications that they were engaged with a lively, vigorous discussion with Ben, feel free to check that out as well. So you can kind of hear their perspective on it too.
Yeah, why don't we commit to sending that out to you all with the timestamp of where that discussion starts, so it's an easy find for you. We can do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ben, was there a reason given for dropping the requirement for bike parking at short-term rentals? What was the thinking behind that?
They just felt that it wasn't necessary. I made the argument that perhaps you have bike tourists, and some of these short-term rentals include accessory dwelling units. And so my reasoning was, well, if you provide one rack, and frequently bike tourists might be couples touring, that the owner of that home and accessory dwelling unit probably would not want to see bikes brought into the unit. And so I thought that it would be prudent to have some bike parking for that, but they just felt it wasn't necessary.
Seems like it sends a message to visitors to Longmont that if you come here, be prepared to drive everywhere you want to go.
Or bike share.
Any other questions? I have one more question. The cargo bike parking requirement. What was kind of their general theme around that to reduce it?
Well, I think I missed mentioning one item, which was providing bike parking at much smaller developments. And that was sort of coupled into the cargo bike parking requirement. Is like some of these smaller sites, they felt that there just wouldn't be room for bicycle parking. I have seen some very small sites indeed that have provided bike parking. It's really not a problem, but they didn't see it that way. So they just wanted to relax the requirement. I just didn't feel comfortable with it. I don't know that there was a good or bad reason for it. They just didn't feel comfortable with it. I think they also felt like the demand was just not there, although anecdotally it seems like the desire for cargo bike parking is growing. So I think there is.
Well, yeah. If you look at gas prices, I think cargo bikes are flying off the shelves. So, any other questions? Then I guess we'll move on to the next item. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
RTD service changes.
Yeah. Ooh, I'll do this one. And I forgot to introduce myself earlier, so for the recording or if anyone's listening or watching online, I'm Cammie Edson, the Transportation Planning Manager for the City of Longmont. So RTD, as most of you might know, but maybe not everybody, they usually make service changes 3 times a year. And so this is their summer season change. These changes that are listed on your form, we'll go over them real quick, actually went into play yesterday. They usually start their service changes on Sundays. So yesterday, June 7th, was when these changes take place. And the 2 routes that are directly affected in Longmont are one of our local routes, the 324 route. school just ended, but what they did was they changed the route times to align better with the school bell. So when school does start up, and for those going to summer school or using the building in the summer, the bus will now make it easier and make it, an easier choice to take with that alignment. So we're happy about that one. And the regional route, formerly known as LD3, is now known as the 287, since the route only goes up and down 287. LD usually denotes going from Longmont to Denver. It was confusing to people to know that this was just a 287 route. So they've changed the name in part to make it align better with the actual service. And then the route itself has increased frequency up to 30-minute headways, which is a nice thing. So all of these changes are positive. So thank you, RTD, for that. The next run board looks like it's being considered for August or September, which would be the final one in 2026. So we'll be watching that one closely as well to see what might directly impact Longmont and what services those will come forward. So as I find out about that, I'll bring those forward to the tab of what's being proposed in the staff update. And then once things are finalized, I'll give you the final plan as well. And then you have the websites if you want to read more about how RTD does their processes. But that's it. Any questions about the RTD changes?
Thank you, Cami. Any questions? I guess I have one for the August. Would that include potentially the airport conversation?
Potentially.
Okay. Now, also because I've been a little bit out of the loop, do we have a route to the East Hospital yet?
Not yet. It's being looked at as part of what RTD is referring the COA. It's like their next strategic plan of how a route servicing that, repurposing a current route that is no longer of interest that had been identified in the previous plan. It's sort of repurposing one of the three, I think it was 328, 329 that haven't come on board yet, and looking at that lake. So those discussions are happening between staff right now. So when it would happen is still to be determined, and the feasibility of it is also still to be determined, but definitely under discussion between agencies of what could that look like and what makes the most sense.
I would encourage RTD to understand that I guarantee with all the building and people going to a hospital, people need transit.
Yep. The future development out that way. So that's not lost on either agency side is what's the benefit of a route out there, what it could bring.
Yeah. And my entire tenure on this board, we've been talking about this route.
Yeah.
So,
Fair.
all right. Any other questions? All right. Then moving on to public invited to be heard. Do we have any public in attendance? It appears no. So I guess we'll move on to information items.
Do you want me to? I think, we have a guest presenter tonight. Yes. So as you remember, last month we had on deck to hear from our Chief Financial Officer. She's here tonight to present instead. So we're going to have her go first, and then Kaylee will follow with an update around the regional e-bike share. But Kaylee, do you mind clicking that on? So we can run the presentation for you, and you can go from here, or you can hop up to the podium, whatever you prefer.
I don't mind standing at the podium.
Okay, sure. So the intent was to kind of talk about citywide budget first and then talk about the CIP budget, but we kind of have them broken up a little bit. Yeah, sure.
Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate your flexibility. I apologize for abandoning you during your last meeting, and thanks again for the flexibility for allowing me to come back this evening. So this is a presentation that we typically give to new city council members. So he just disappeared. I was going to tell Councilmember Popkin this will look very familiar to him. The intent is to really familiarize new city council members with our a high-level overview of finance, and then it's more heavily concentrated on our budget process because council is so actively involved in that process. So we, as finance, have a variety of legal requirements that we have to adhere to. So all the way from state statutes down to just policies and procedures, such as some of the things you were all discussing earlier this evening, they all play a role in finances, operation, as well as how we build our budget. It's really important to understand that as a government entity, we are very much fund structure oriented. And there are 3 different types of funds. There's, and I'm going to kind of start backwards and work my way up. There are what really determines accounting standards say that what really determines the type of fund that we create as we're creating new, or the type of fund that we currently have, what really determines what type of fund it is the type of revenue that we collect in that fund. So if whether it's taxes or user fees, such as on the utility billing, whether it's a grant, predominantly grant recipient fund, those are the revenues that really determine the type of funds that we can have and administer here at the city. So we've got internal service funds, and in these ones, so our fleet fund is really the example that I like to use. Our fleet fund is a fund that maintains, owns, and purchases all of our fleet use throughout the city. All of our other operating funds that use those vehicles and fleet equipment pay into that fleet fund. So an internal service fund, the source of revenue come from all the other operating funds in the city. Hence, it's called internal service fund. And we do have several of them. The fleet fund, as I mentioned, the employee benefit fund operates that way as well. The newest one that we added is our utility billing customer information system internal service fund. So we have a few internal service funds. A special revenue fund is a fund that has a dedicated revenue source. So the street fund, the transportation community investment fee fund that you all are so familiar with, those are special revenue funds because there is a dedicated source of revenue that can only be used for that specific purpose. And we have a number of special revenue funds throughout the city. We also have a number of enterprise funds. So enterprise funds, water, sewer, electric, those are all your utility billing. The revenue to those enterprise funds are the utility rates. And then everything else, all the other services that the city provides that really don't have a dedicated revenue source fall into the general fund. And the general fund, the main source of revenues in the general fund are are taxes, really. Two different kinds of taxes, property taxes and the non-earmarked sales and use tax. So the general fund provides a lot of services to the community. We have 49 total funds across the organization that we budget for. I'm not going to go through each of these, but they all really are based on those 4 categories that we just looked at. So one of the things that really governs finance and the way that we put together and City Council then adopts our budget is our financial policies. These are updated and reviewed by staff annually. They're adopted by council annually as part of the budget process. We have 8 different categories of financial policies and 104 policies within those 8 categories. So it's pretty extensive. It's a pretty broad list of financial policies. I embedded a document here that when you launch it, it will open up and you can peruse our 104 policies at your leisure. I'm going to ask Cammie or Stephanie, if you haven't already sent the presentation to them, please share it with them so that they can access the links that are embedded in this document. So there's a few things, again, that really govern our budget. A municipal charter requirement that we have to adopt a line item budget. Hence the reason, if you have looked at our budget on the city's website, it's like 800 plus pages. It is a very large document. And a good share of that document is all the line item detail for every service in every fund throughout the organization. So it's a lot of detail. But the reason that we presented at that level, and I will tell you, we are certainly in the minority in terms of other comparable cities. Most cities don't present a line item budget in their actual adopted budget document, but because we have a charter requirement, we do have to. In the general fund and the public safety fund, and this is our goal really is to expand this beyond the general fund and the public safety fund. But in those 2 funds, we have a base budget philosophy. So you start with your ongoing budget from the prior year, and then whatever additional ongoing resources that you need that you cannot cover within that budget amount, you have to make a budget request for. And if that is funded, that becomes part of your base budget then the following year. There's a few things that we don't classify as that base budget because they are really outside of the control of the department. And those are, the biggest one is salary budgets for staffing. HR does a salary survey each year, and our pay increases, if we can afford to do so, will be based on that salary. And then budget staff calculates what that is and just loads it into the budgets for the departments. They don't have to worry about what that is. We just do that and add it to their budget for them. Our fleet lease rates that I was speaking about before, where every operating department that owns a vehicle or fleet equipment, those are calculated by our fleet department and added to their base budget, so they don't have to worry about that. There's a few others, our liability insurance, our work comp, those types of things. So those are in addition to what the departments really have to manage in terms of their base budget. We do classify budget requests in, to 3 different categories. So one-time budget requests are those types of things that they will be requesting that is one-time in nature, non-recurring type expenses. And we have a fair amount of these types of budget requests year after year. And then ongoing, we have we classify them in 2 different levels of ongoing. Level 1 is something that is really outside of your control in terms of you are going to be, and when I say you, I'm talking the manager of that budget. They are going to be paying for that level of increase regardless of whether or not we provide them additional funding or not. A really, really good example of this is utility charges or contractual obligations. So those are level 1 type requests. They're the things that we absolutely have to, provided we have funding, fund first. Level 2 requests then are an enhancement to service level, a new position, those types of things that a manager really does have control over as to whether or not we have to fund. And then I'm sure you all are very familiar with our CIP. We adopt a 5-year CIP and have been doing this since 1988. It really is our planning capital improvement program. It really is our planning tool for infrastructure related expenses. And even though we do ask staff annually to update their CIP projects, it is only that first year that does get rolled into the operating budget for the upcoming year. The other 4 years are just planning for planning purposes and can and do change over time. And I guess one key thing is in order to qualify as a CIP, it has to have at least a life expectancy of 5 years and a minimum cost of $10,000. Otherwise, it is more of a operating capital expense rather than a CIP. So this is a look at our budget and CIP timeline. It is a lengthy process. Staff start with preparing and updating their current CIP projects in March. We follow that by the operating budget for staff in April. And in May, we have an initial conversation with council, typically an initial conversation with council regarding the upcoming budget. And then June and July is that time frame that I mentioned before where HR is really finalizing market salary data. We are meeting with the city leadership. The departments are presenting their budget to Harold and the assistant city managers. And in July, we start our general fund revenue projections. Departments that really manage separate funds like the utilities, et cetera, are doing their revenue projections kind of in that April, May timeframe. We certainly can update those as new or better information comes, to light. But from a general fund, from a property tax, from a sales tax perspective, we really don't start putting revenue projections together until July. Property tax, that's because we cannot get property tax information from the county really any sooner than that. And sales tax, we truly just want to try to get as many months of current year collection as we can, so we can see what sort of trends are happening. And then in August, so this is another city charter requirement, we have to have our proposed budget presented to council on or before September 1st. Well, Tuesday very rarely falls on a September 1st, so it is typically the last meeting, the last council meeting in August where we are presenting our proposed budget, and that does include the CIP. And then throughout the month of September, we're doing various presentations to City Council on different aspects of the budget. CIP usually does take up one full meeting because staff does go into quite a bit of detail on our proposed CIP projects. Another conversation is around pay and benefits. We spend a fair amount of time talking to council about that component of the budget. And then we have to hold another charter requirement. We have to hold our first public hearing on the budget on or before October 1st. We typically hold 2 public hearings throughout the budget process, with the first one usually being before October 1st. And then in early October, we get final direction from council and implement whatever changes council is requesting that we make to the budget, and then they adopt that in October. And it takes a variety of ordinances and resolutions to adopt our budget for the year. So it's an adoption ordinance, an appropriation ordinance, mill levy ordinances for the DDA, for the general fund mill levy, a pay plan resolution, financial policy resolution. So there's a number of actions that council does officially take to adopt our budget in October, and then it becomes effective the following year. So, as I mentioned, it is a pretty lengthy process that involves all folks across the organization to complete. So what I wanted to do was just give you a snapshot of the most recent budget that was where we've gone through an entire budget cycle, because once it's effective and we're into the first of the year, it is not static. It does change, and there are various reasons that we change the budget. And I'll go through some of those to give you kind of a sense of that. But what I wanted to try to illustrate here in the next several slides is really how does or can the budget change since the first time council sees it to when they adopt it, to then what does it look like when we're at the end of the year after we've done all of our additional appropriations for the year. So using 25 as an example, it was a balanced budget because we have to present a balanced budget. That's a state requirement. It's a city charter requirement. But when I say balanced, I don't necessarily mean that all of our expenses is covered by revenue. As I mentioned, we have one-time expenses. The CIP is a really good example of a very large one-time expense. And so balanced could mean, and does mean, the use of fund balance. And that fund balance, in some cases, in the utility funds, for instance, those utility rates are set at a level to recover enough so that they can build up a fund balance to be able to do a project. Hence the reason, really, that we use such a large amount of fund balance. It is by design. It is fund balance that we have intentionally been building up so that we can afford to do these very large, very expensive capital improvement program projects. So this is what our 25 budget looked like when we first presented it to council in August, at the end of August. And then usually, very rarely, I should say, have we not had changes to our budget from the time council first sees it to the time that they adopt it then in October. In 25, those changes were predominantly in the general fund because property tax. So I mentioned that we cannot get property tax information from the assessor's office until the June, July type timeframe. Well, that is still very preliminary information that we get from them because they have not yet certified to us what our assessed values are for the city. We don't get our preliminary certifications from the county until August 25th, which if you reflect back to the timeline that I said, we have to have a proposed budget to council no later than September 1st. That doesn't give us a whole lot of cushion there. So we always use a preliminary number in our property tax. Yes, it is information that it's a best estimate of where we think property taxes will be, but it's by no means final. And so in 25, that was a difference of $2.6 million in the general fund between our very preliminary numbers that we got from the assessor's office and the preliminary certifications that we get in August. Once we get them in August, they can still change until December because we don't receive, they could change up until the beginning of December. We don't receive final assessed value information from the assessor's office until the end of November, beginning of December. So they can and do still change. And in this year, they changed by a fair amount. So that really is the bulk of those changes that we had to make to the budget from the time we first presented it to council and when they adopted it. And then the council adopts it, it becomes effective January 1, and then we're changing it again. It really is a living, breathing thing because we will do additional appropriations throughout the year for a variety of reasons. We get a grant, for instance. We get some additional unplanned for revenue, and in order for the departments to spend that, we have to appropriate it. Council has to appropriate it. So we are constantly bringing additional appropriations to City Council, and our budget does change over time. Carryover. So let's talk a little bit about carryover because by our charter, all of our appropriations in all funds except one lapse at the end of the year. So the appropriations for those CIP projects that are multi-year projects has now lapsed, and we have to carry it over. We have to budget the full amount up front because our purchasing code requires that we have the appropriation, the full appropriation, and this is also a Tabor issue. We have to have the full appropriation in place before we can award a bid or an RFP or award a contract, essentially. So even though we know this project or this, one-time thing is going to span more than 1 year, we have to have the full amount appropriated up front, even though we know we're not going to spend it in that first year. But those appropriations by charter lapse, and we have to carry them over through an additional appropriation, add them to the budget for next year, so that we can continue paying on those contracts. So it's carryover, or it's the new dollars that I was talking about, the new grant, the new whatever may be unplanned source of revenue that we now know we're going to get. I think I covered all that. So this is what the 25 budget looked like when it was all said and done at the end of the year. We started with an adopted budget of $473 million. We ended with a budget of $711 million. That was $238 million that we added to our budget in 25. It is a significant amount. But you will see that most of it is carryover. So it's dollars that council previously appropriated, wasn't spent, is still needed for the purpose that it was appropriated for. Now we just have to carry it over. So this chart kind of gives you a sense of the size of the carryover relative to the new appropriations. Because as I mentioned in the slide before, two types of appropriations, new dollars or carryover. And one of the things that you'll really notice is that starting in 2013, 2014, our carryover, the orange line, really took off relative to the blue line, which is the new dollars that are being appropriated. So what really started that climb of the carryover was the flood, and the sheer volume of the improvements and costs of the improvements that we had to make due to the flood, and that really has just kind of continued, not necessarily flood related, but other, very expensive types of projects. So ARPA funding, we got ARPA funding for recovery. We couldn't, of course, spend it in 1 year. And so that has contributed to the carryover. We got disaster recovery in our community development block grant HUD funding. So that's kind of continued as well. Bond dollars is another really big contributor to this. We have issued some pretty significant bonds for water improvements that we have had to carry over until they can spend those funds. Storm drainage bonds. We did bonds for the Civic Center for the remodel for the Civic Center, the library, safety and justice. Those are all the types of projects that have contributed to that orange line, really increasing over the years. So again, these are the really what's contributed to that increase, the bond funds, the CIP recovery programs, and then grant dollars as well. Okay, so now this is a snapshot of our 2026 adopted budget. And this is the source of funds. So this is the revenue side of the budget. And 47 out of all of our funds, 47% of it is charges for services. So those utility funds really make up that biggest component under charges for services. Taxes, so our sales and use tax, which gets split across the 5 funds plus LURA, that's on the right-hand side of your slide, plus property taxes. We get property taxes in the general fund, in the Downtown Development Authority Fund, and then in the General Improvement District that is pretty much the same boundaries of the DDA. So those are our 3 property tax funds. So that's the sources side of our 26 budget. And here is the uses side of our 26 budget. So the top pie chart, it really just shows you by fund. And you will see that over 50% of that $519 million budget is in the general fund and the electric and broadband fund. And then the little bar graph below that top pie chart is intended to show you based on the category of expenses. And operating and maintenance make up 37% of that. But I will tell you that there is one sole expense that makes that greater than any other, greater than even the personal services, and that is purchase power. $70 million in our 2026 budget is for purchase power, the power that we purchase from Platte River Power Authority. So if we were to exclude that, salary, personal services, salary and benefits is our largest citywide cost. And then on the right is our CIP, but this is only a snapshot of the 2026 projects. So $93.2 million, with most of it being a transportation type related project. And then I wanted to wrap up with our priority-based budgeting. So this is kind of an ancillary budget process that we have been doing for a number of years. We started doing it in 2010 just for our general fund services, and then we expanded it in 2015 citywide. It's a multi-step process, and I'll take you through that in just a bit, that really took the goals from Envision Longmont in 2015. We took those goals from Envision Longmont to represent the priorities, the results that we from an organization are here to provide to the community. We did build in equity component to this in 22, and then we took that equity component and built it into the scoring process in 23. And I'll go through the scoring process with you as well. So our priority-based budgeting process really is a means of allocating our resources based on relative priority of programs. It allows us to link budget decisions to those strategic results of priority-based budgeting. And I know this probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense at this point, but we have a lot of information on our priority-based budgeting, PBB we call it, on our city's website. I've also embedded some information here that, when you receive this presentation, you can launch these embedded documents and really learn more about this process. But as I mentioned, it is a multi-step process that step one, we have to identify what are the results that we as an organization are wanting to achieve in the community. And that was what we linked to our goals from Envision Longmont. And then we added, so Envision Longmont worked great. The goals from Envision Longmont worked great for our results for priority-based budgeting, for services that we are providing directly to the community. What we had to do was then supplement a governance result for services that are internal in nature, where we, like finance, is a really good example of this. Our business, we don't necessarily provide support or services directly to the community. Our sole purpose is to provide support to the rest of the organization so they can provide those services directly to the community. So that's what we mean by governance results. So it's the city attorney's office, it's HR, it's those kind of back-end support functions that really weren't identified in Envision Longmont. So we added a governance result to capture those ones. So that was step one. Step two then was to define what those results are. So what do we mean when we say we are here to achieve a result of livable centers, corridors, and neighborhoods? What does that mean? So we went through an exercise of really defining what that means. And that is really key then to the scoring process. We had to have very clearly defined results in order for the departments to then score their programs. So that's all that is in that additional information in this presentation for you. So step three then was a community involvement process that we went through, where the goal here is we wanted the community to value those results for us. Give us the relative value of those results. And so we did an online survey. We did what we like to call the chips in the bucket exercise. We took this out to the community. We in front of grocery stores, at the library. We really tried to hit up as many different places throughout the community as we could. And what we did was we had a stack of 10 chips, and we gave it to a citizen, a resident, and we asked them to place those chips in the bucket that represented the different results based on how they feel, that based on their importance, their personal opinion in regards to how important these items were to them. And so when like I said, we did it in a variety of different ways, and those percentages represent the averages that we got back from this fairly large community involvement process. And what the community told us is that housing services, amenities, and opportunities for all was the most important thing to them. So that's what those percentages represent. And so, again, this plays into the scoring component. So then, the next step in the process, and these steps kind of occur simultaneously. So we had staff then start identifying all of the different programs and services that you provide to the community. Or if you're governance, all of the different programs and services that you provide to the organization so they can provide that support to the community. And we took that list, and each of those programs had a definition that really described what does that program mean, what does it do. And it went through a self-scoring process. So step one was for the departments to self-score their programs. And they were scoring them based on two different components of scores. There was basic program attribute component, and then a results scoring. So let me first talk about the basic program attributes, because there are 5 different components of scoring. Are you mandated to provide your service? And if so, at what level? Is it a federal mandate? Is it a state mandate? Is it a code mandate? Is it just a best practice? Because each one of those levels received a different score based on how easy, I guess, or how easy it is for us to potentially change that mandate. So if it is a best practice, we don't have to adhere to best practices. So that would be a lower score. If it is a federal mandate, the chances of us changing that federal mandate are pretty slim. So that received a higher score, and anywhere in between there. There was another component called reliance on the city to provide the program. So are there other, maybe it's another governmental agency, maybe it's a nonprofit, maybe it's a for-profit that is providing the exact same or similar programs that we are. So there was a scoring component based on, are we really the only ones that provide this service? There was a scoring component for cost recovery. If your program is 100% offset by revenue of some sort, directly for that program, you received a higher score. If you're reliant, like many of our general fund services, if you're reliant on taxes, then your program itself doesn't generate any revenue, you received a lower score, and everywhere in between. Portion of community served. Is this program just to a very small group of citizens, or does it really provide a service to the whole city? Equity, that's the one I said we layered in most recently, and I'm getting a 5-minute over here, so I'm gonna kind of rush through this a little bit. So there was basic program attributes. We also had a scoring component based on the how you influence that result that we were talking about in the last few slides. So if your program was essential to providing that result, you got a higher score. If your program had very little influence on achieving that result, you got a lower score. So every department went through a self-scoring. We had a peer review process to validate those scores, and it resulted in a prioritized list of city services. So a quick snapshot of what our 26 funded budget requests look like in terms of, and I know it's very difficult to read, but you can certainly, when we send this out to you, you'll be able to see it. a little bit better. But what we attempted to do was kind of line up our budget requests to how did they meet these different priorities, as well as the council priority. And then the last slide here, in priority-based budgeting, the notion behind priority-based budgeting is to group your expenses, the cost for those services, into quartiles, with quartile 1 being the most aligned to those results, and quartile 4 being the least aligned to those results. And the intent here really is to give management and city council and the community a snapshot of how well our services and the cost of our services line up to the priorities that we heard from the community through Envision Longmont, and then as well as through that chips in the bucket exercise that we did. So this is our 26 adopted budget. Happy to say that the lion's share of our expenses across the organization are very well aligned with the priorities, the results. The lower ones doesn't necessarily mean we can't do them. They may be mandated programs and we still have to do them. They're just not very well aligned. So I'll stop there. No, that was the last, that was my last slide, so.
Thank you, Teresa.
Well, then, thank you, Teresa. I'll leave it to the board with any questions or comments. Board member McInerney. That was the first one on the list. I don't know how to use the thing. Sorry.
Thank you for attending our meeting, and thank you for the enlightening presentation. We're the Transportation Advisory Board, so we're particularly interested in how the revenues from the street fund are allocated. Now, the street fund is codified at section 4.04.130 of Longmont's Code of Ordinances. That section of the code reads in part that the fund, and I'm quoting here, shall exist solely to fund operations, maintenance, rehabilitation, and improvement of the city transportation system, end quote. Now, I looked up that word solely in my dictionary, and the synonym that was given was exclusively. Also regarding the street fund, Longmont's 2026 adopted budget in the administrative and franchise fee policies section on page 54 states that, and I'm going to quote again, such revenues shall only be used to fund operations, maintenance, rehabilitation, and improvement of the city's street transportation, sidewalk, and bikeway systems, end of quote. And there's a little note in fine print under that paragraph that says, the city currently follows this policy. Solely and only for transportation improvements. Here's a question for you. Based on the municipal code and the adopted budget, if I say that it's reasonable for people in Longmont to expect that the taxes they pay into the street fund will be spent on transportation projects, would you disagree?
No, I would agree. Let's
look at some street fund allocations in recent years. I'll present a number of project examples taken from the CIP and adopted budget data, and then I'll ask you some questions about them.
Okay.
In 2022, $137,500 from the street fund was allocated to stream maintenance and restoration projects. That was project WTR 195. For 2029 and 2030, a total of $100,000 from the street fund is proposed to be allocated to those stream maintenance and restoration projects. The project's descriptions and project justifications for these improvements do not mention street culverts. They don't mention bridges. They do not appear to be related to transportation. In 2024, $68,680 from the street fund was allocated to replacement of prairie dog barriers throughout the city. That's project PRO 211. The project description and project justification do not mention streets or traffic safety. This is an open space project. Open space has its own dedicated sales and use tax. Recent CIPs proposed allocation of a total of approximately $677,000 from the street fund for a variety of municipal building renovations, including roof replacements, boiler replacements, flooring replacements, HVAC replacements, and a keyless entry system. The largest of the building renovation categories are roof replacements and boiler replacements. Now, in the context of $25 million in annual revenue for the street fund, $677,000 may not seem exceptional, but I'm inclined to paraphrase the quote often attributed to the late Senator Everett Dirksen. 100,000 here, 100,000 there, and pretty soon you're talking real money. Here's a question for you. How do we go from municipal code that requires street fund revenues to be spent solely on transportation improvements and an adopted budget policy that requires them to be used only for transportation improvements? How do we go from those mandates to CIP allocations of nearly $1 million for projects with no apparent direct link to transportation?
So I would have to look into those first two projects that you spoke about. I cannot give you an answer on those two tonight, the stream project and the prairie dog. But for the building project, what I can tell you is that is maintenance on a building that houses and the operations of the staff working in the street fund. So it is expenses for street projects or supporting street funded staff.
So those building improvements only occur in buildings that house transportation-related employees?
No, that's not what I'm saying. Those types of building improvements, so those types, that project is managed by our facility maintenance staff. They maintain all of our buildings for the most part across the organization, whether it is a general fund funded or employees working in the general fund to employees working in the water fund to employees working in the street fund. We allocate those dollars based on the staff that are occupying those facilities.
So let me understand your rationale. Tell me if I've got this right. You're saying that it's a transportation improvement because it's improving buildings that are somehow involved in transportation?
No, that's not what I'm saying. So the street fund pays for staff. It's not just all CIP. There is a large amount of expenses to pay for staff.
You mean salary and benefits?
Salary and benefits.
Come out of the street fund and
Yes.
go to transportation?
Correct.
Okay.
Right, because they are working on transportation-related items. Now, if the street fund were its very own business, that business would have to pay for maintenance of a building. So therefore, we are charging the street fund for maintenance of a building that houses the staff.
And how do you figure out how much should be charged to the street fund and how much should be charged to other funds?
Typically, it's based on square footage of occupied staff.
Office square footage? Okay.
Typically,
That's very interesting information. Thank you very much. You said that you wouldn't be able to address stream maintenance and restoration or prairie dogs this evening.
no, I would need to look into those two projects.
What if I
further
ask
for
our
you.
secretary, our board secretary, to give you these two excerpts from capital improvement program documents? They are the project sheets that I mentioned.
I can try, but again, I may not be able to speak to that
Okay.
tonight.
Okay. Stephanie, would you do the honors? And I've underlined the funded street fund allocation for each of those two.
Yeah, those are good questions. Let's get that and we can get that back.
I was going to say, Board Member McInerney, would you be open to us bringing that back so then we can get to the second presentation tonight and stay on agenda so we can not have an extended meeting necessarily? Because I think it is worth answering your question, but would you be open to having them answered next meeting, especially when Director Jim Inkstead is here, part of the Public Works Department, where those fall under. So I think having the right staff and the time for them to get the answer seems
The right
reasonable.
staff and time to do their research as well.
All righty.
Virtual update, and email update, probably.
Yeah, we can provide it in advance answers, but I think, that way we can get the right answer, but also keep on our agenda for the night.
Mm-hmm.
Does that
Let's
feel
let's
reasonable?
Consider the fleet fund. I'll move on. The CIP indicates that the primary source of revenue for the fleet fund is transfers from other funds to pay for fleet services, but those funds are not named. So is money from the street fund transferred to the fleet fund?
So, yes, to
Okay.
pay for the depreciation and maintenance on vehicles and equipment utilized by street-funded employees.
So is that's based on employees, not the value of the transportation-related vehicles?
It's based on the value and the maintenance of the vehicles, but it's vehicles operated by employees that are funded out of the street fund.
Okay, so I bring this up because there are proposed CIP allocations of more than $26 million for a new fleet facility that they show up towards the tail end of the current CIP. So should we assume that a certain amount of the street fund is going to be allocated to that new fleet facility?
Well,
Again, based on the amount of the value of transportation
I
fleet
don't know
resources?
that I can answer that specific question off the top of my head tonight. I would have to look into that for you. But I will tell you that that is an unfunded project. We are not proposing that we fund that project. It is unfunded.
Okay, but it's on the CIP, which
As an unfunded project,
which
yes.
demonstrates intention to fund it at some time? Am I
It
right?
demonstrates potential need. I don't know at this point whether we can afford to fund that.
Got it. Okay, let's move on to Vision Zero. In May 2023, Longmont City Council unanimously adopted a resolution committing to a Vision Zero program. The resolution acknowledges that during the period from year 2000 to year 2021, 42,140 motor vehicle-related crashes occurred in Longmont, resulting in 4,688 severe injuries and 92 fatalities. Vision Zero is a strategy to eliminate traffic-related deaths and serious injuries and to enhance travel safety for everyone who uses our streets. The council resolution directs city staff to develop a Vision Zero action plan. This board has demonstrated support for the Vision Zero strategy on numerous occasions in recent years. At our April board meeting, we learned that Longmont's Vision Zero action plan has lost momentum and is at least a year behind schedule. Now, delay in receiving a federal grant was identified as a key factor. We also learned that the city considered fully funding Vision Zero's planning process in 2025 from municipal sources only, but decided not to do that. Can you comment to the board on how that decision was made? Was that part of the PBB process? Were there discussions at which there was agreement that Longmont streets are safe enough as they are and that expediting the Vision Zero action plan is not a high priority?
So I can tell you it was not PBB. We have not used PBB in that manner. I should say we have not used PBB to not fund Vision Zero. I don't know, to be honest with you, why that decision was made. That is probably a decision, a question that we need to ask city leadership.
I think Board Member McInerney, we've come and given a number of updates to TAB that we have been funding Zero this whole time. We've been making progress. We have a draft plan. We have our delayed grant at this point. So progress is moving forward. So the council's intention, staff intention to move this all forward is moving forward. And I think we're making great momentum, especially now that we do have our federal funds. So the delay is over and that we've been presenting updates all along. So I don't think there was a delay in momentum. I think there was a delay in funding, which changed how we had to prioritize what local funds were available. So internal staff made decisions of what can we afford with the dollars allocated in that given budget year in 2025 versus 2026 to keep things rolling, which we did do. And so I think, what was it, 2 months ago or 3 months ago, you had a major update on what was used, what local dollars were funded. You got the presentation from Fair and Peers on the high injury network, the high risk network, the LOSS prioritized intersections. All of that was used to keep the action plan going. They are all part of the action plan. So it is all moving forward and going in progress. I'm sorry if it was misunderstood that we weren't addressing the Vision Zero action plan. Those are key components to the Vision Zero action plan.
Well,
And
that was the meeting.
I was just going to say, thank you, Cammie. I think the intention all along was to fund it over a phased approach. It was never, at least my understanding, was never to fund it all at once.
Well, and the internal discussions around could we pay for it internally were happening when we had no idea how long it was going to take to get our federal funds. So we had those discussions. And what we decided we could afford was to keep going with the data analysis, which is what you got the presentation on, versus funding the whole thing and not having it be a plan that wasn't necessarily as robust as we wanted it to be. So we have now received the funds that we needed and kept the progress going on sort of Vision Zero pieces to get those building blocks in place. So the plan as envisioned and as what we wanted that grant for can actually come to be instead of cutting the process off too soon with a lower dollar amount.
That April meeting was the meeting at which I showed everyone in attendance this multicolored project
Yep. So I
timeline.
created that. I presented it, yeah. So that was
Yeah.
our proposed plan at the time. And then
Right.
we've had to adjust as we've learned more from the feds about their timing and intention on the grant. So
Well,
the
my
good news
point
is we
then and now is that it shows the entire Vision Zero action plan being completed in April of this year.
yeah,
So, as I said then, we're a year behind schedule.
yep. So we can
All
thank
right.
the feds for that, but we finally got it in and we are ready to
All right.
rock and roll. So,
All right, so I'm just urging city staff and city council to consider Vision Zero implementation to be not only a transportation improvement, but also a public safety improvement, eligible for funding allocations from Longmont's Public Safety Fund. Vision Zero implementation would also be a great use for future traffic camera fine revenue. Longmont has budgeted $676,000 in revenue from that source for this year, 2026. So I urge city staff and city council to be respectful of Longmont citizens who voted to tax themselves for transportation improvements by allocating street fund revenues only to transportation projects. And I urge staff and council to do everything they can to support completion and implementation of the Vision Zero action plan. A specific recommendation I would have is to add a Vision Zero implementation line item to the CIP as a TRP project. That would be for engineering aspects of Vision Zero. We've heard that Vision Zero can be described as having engineering, enforcement, and education components. I would like to see Vision Zero implementation added to the public safety budget as well as a line item. That would be addressing the enforcement and education aspects of Vision Zero. And once again,
Board member, let's keep going.
all right,
Yeah.
traffic camera fine revenue, perfect match for Vision Zero implementation, revenue to funding. Thank you.
All right, board member Polmano.
On this priority-based budgeting process, you may have mentioned it in your presentation there, but is that an annual, or how frequent do you go back and
So that is a great
verify.
step. So let me go back to the steps. So identify the right results, define the results, and value the results are not steps that happen very often.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, those are tied to Envision Zero. So unless council directs that we, and that was by council direction. So unless council directs a different linkage, we really wouldn't update those steps in the process. Going the wrong way. Identifying and scoring the programs. So we only update these as programs change. If there's new programs, if a program takes a very different look, do we have to update those sections? The costing that leads us to this is updated annually.
Okay.
I couldn't say.
And also with
Stumped Siri.
the, and with the CIP program, only that first year is funded, correct? Is the
Becomes-
rest?
Is rolled into our operating budget, correct, our annual budget, because we adopt a one-year budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, thank you for the
Okay.
presentation.
Well, thank you.
It was a lot to take in, so.
And I will get back to you all on these two projects.
All right, next up, we have Kaylee for bike share. Is that what? Regional e-bike share updates?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kaylee. I'm a transportation planner with the city, here to give you an update this evening on the Northwest Regional e-bike share program. So today's agenda, we will quickly go over the history of e-bike share or bike share in Longmont. We will quickly go over the planning work that has been done to date and where we are at in the process today, and then we will look at next steps. So some of you may be familiar, but wanted to make sure that everyone on the board was familiar and kind of level set. Longmont has had bike share in the past. We had a Zagster, which was the company from April 2017 to about June 2020. There were a total of 50 bikes. I believe they were regular pedal bikes, so not e-bikes, and 10 stations, so 10 locations around the city. Some of those locations included the area outside of the Library and Civic Center Plaza, which is shown in that photograph on the screen. Also the Rec Center and 8th and Kaufman. This program was made possible by collaborative funding with public-private partnerships. So with Oscar Blues, Visit Longmont, Longmont Hospital, Boulder County, and the city. And I believe it ended, as we all know, 2020 COVID hit, and I believe Zagster was facing financial troubles. And so the program unfortunately ended. And so we have not had bike share in Longmont since. So I will go over each of these chunks in more depth, but wanted to give you an overview of what this timeline has looked like for this kind of phase of trying to get bike share in Longmont, starting with the Northwest Regional e-bike share feasibility study that was completed in 2024. All the way through our application to the state, through the Colorado Energy Office, our contracting with them, some pre-implementation work. We did release an RFP for the vendor, and then our current contracting phase. So in 2022, DRCOG had a call for projects for their Transportation Demand Management Set-Aside Grant. This is a grant that DRCOG leads that municipalities and transportation management organizations are eligible to apply for. It is a non-infrastructure grant. So most of those grants are either studies or marketing and communications. It's funded by CMAQ. So again, non-infrastructure grant. And so Commuting Solutions, which is one of the transportation management organizations that covers Longmont, applied for this grant for a feasibility study of expanding e-bike share in their service area. Their service area covers the 36 corridors, so that does include City of Boulder, City of Longmont, Superior, Westminster, Broomfield. And so essentially that study looked at baseline data. They had community engagement, public surveys, partner meetings to really answer the question, would expanding Boulder B-Cycle or expanding regional e-bike share be feasible? And the study did find that that was feasible. And so that study wrapped up at the end of 2024. And that was kind of the catalyst for our grant application. And so this is just a screenshot from Commuting Solutions website, mainly just to highlight that Commuting Solutions and their regional partners, regional municipalities, have been working on bike share in the region for quite some time, starting all the way back in 2008 to the completion of that feasibility study. So like I mentioned, that feasibility study wrapped up in 2024 and was really the catalyst for this application to the Colorado Energy Office. They have a community accelerated mobility program. Sorry for the lowercase there, camp grant. And so in October of 2024, Longmont, along with our co-applicants, which are, again, the municipalities that are in the Commuting Solutions TMO service area, decided to apply for an implementation grant. So the thought process was, we have this feasibility study. The study showed it was feasible. We just need funding for implementation. Let's apply for this grant. And so Longmont was the lead applicant because the state did not want to contract with 6 municipalities. And so Longmont was the lead, and then we had our co-applicants. Those include Boulder County, Broomfield, Commuting Solutions, Lafayette, Superior, and Westminster. I will note that obviously City of Boulder is not on this list. They have an existing bike share program there. They've had that for years. So they were not a part of this specific grant process, but they were a part of the feasibility study, and they have been a partner in our process. They're obviously a very important partner in our process for regional connectivity. So they're not really referenced in this presentation very much, but I did want to point out we are working with City of Boulder. It's not lost on us, but they're just not a part of this grant. And so the grant was for a docked system and for e-bikes only. So it won't be free floating. You'll have to start and end your trip at physical infrastructure. And so we were awarded $1.5 million, and our IGA with the state was fully executed on March 2025. And so once we had that IGA with the state, we kicked off work with our municipal partners, and it quickly became apparent to us that there was quite a bit of what I call pre-implementation work that we needed to do. There was a lot of nitty-gritty that maybe was not addressed in the feasibility study that we needed to work out as a group. So, questions around governance, like how are we going to make decisions as a group? How do we want to work as a group? What parameters do we need to put on ourselves as a group? Questions around ownership model. So if you're familiar with bike share, you'll know that there are several different types of ownership model. Some municipalities outright own the infrastructure and bikes, and then they have a private vendor or a nonprofit operate the system. Some lease the bikes. Some just have the vendor come in and put the bikes on the ground, and the cities don't own any of the infrastructure. So, as a region, what type of ownership model do we want? We had to ask ourselves for a regulatory framework. How is permitting going to work? In terms of having 5 different municipal partners, each with their own permitting process, what does that look like? What is the timeline for that? Code updates. Do we at the City of Longmont need to update our municipal code? Does anyone else need to? The City of Boulder actually has a specific e-bike and e-scooter share in their municipal code. So do we need to do that as well? Are we going to charge the vendor fees? So you get the picture. There's all these questions that we need to ask ourselves as a group and figure out as a group. So this was months of pre-implementation work. Leading up to the release of the RFP in order to select a vendor. We did have to go out to RFP to select a vendor that was written in the grant and with our IGA with the state. And of course, as I mentioned, one of the kind of big overhead questions we were asking ourselves as a group is, Boulder has an existing system. We're going to go out to RFP. How are we going to ensure seamless connections to the existing system in the region? So once we kind of felt good about answering all those questions and we kind of smoothed out some road humps, for lack of a better word, we did go out, like I said, for a request for proposal to select a vendor. We went through what's called a best value added process, which is a little bit different than a normal RFP process. It is a completely blind process, and we scored in real time with all of our municipal partners. So there was at least one representative from each city on our scoring board. Like I said, we scored in real time. It went really fast. It was a very fast process. And then, sorry, I didn't update that last bullet point there, but we did award a contract with B-Cycle. So it is the same vendor as the City of Boulder. Which is great. That makes the regional connectivity very seamless and very easy. And our contract with B-Cycle was finalized at the end of March this year, 2026. So that kind of leads us into our contracting process. I cannot stress enough how big of a lift this contracting process has been. The city has to have a IGA with each of the municipal partners, which outlines the terms for grant funding allocation and reimbursement. So we have 5 IGAs along with our contract with B-Cycle and our contract with Commuting Solutions. So we are essentially working with 7 different contracts in this process. It is a giant lift. And so those partner IGAs are necessary because the City of Longmont is the lead applicant. We are the only ones receiving funding for the state, and we had to figure out how are we going to get the funding that the state is giving us to our municipal partners. And so we had to have an IGA to make that, to outline those terms and conditions. And then our contract with B-Cycle obviously is the vendor, and then our contract with Commuting Solutions, like I said, they are the TMO, and they will be leading the marketing, communications, community engagement, and branding efforts as written in our application. So we have a proposed regional system. So this is the whole system with all of the partners. And this is what B-Cycle pitched within the $1.5 million budget from the grant. And part of that grant budget is going towards communications and marketing. So with the leftover budget, we have 110 e-bikes and 190 docks. And those are individual docks. Those are like the inverted U-rack shaped docks. They're very flexible in terms of configuration and where B-Cycle can put them. They can be easily moved. So they're not like a giant, like in this picture, you see all the bikes in like one giant block straight line. These docks will be a little bit different. It'll be, like I said, those kind of inverted U-rack shaped docks instead, individual. So that 190 is individual U-racks. So that's the proposed system. And then each partner will have its own contract with B-Cycle, and then each partner will work with B-Cycle as well as the group to determine station locations. Station locations are being determined by a number of things. The first one being relying on the expertise of the vendor. I believe B-Cycle has about 300, maybe 400 e-bikes in Boulder, so they are kind of the expert in the region. So leaning on the expertise and their kind of ideas of locations. So that's one. The second one is looking at, just best practices nationally, looking at NABSA and NACDO in terms of their station siting guides. We do have requirements from our grant, so locations do need to be near transit hubs or bus stops and disproportionately impacted communities. And then us in Longmont, and I'm sure our municipal partners are doing a similar process, is we are working with internal departments to look at those station locations as well. So reaching out to our Parks Department, reaching out to the Downtown Development Authority, reaching out to our housing folks, reaching out to our planning folks, reaching out to community and neighborhood resources. So it's kind of a hodgepodge or a 4-pronged approach, if you will, on where to put these bikes. But as a group, zooming out, looking at the regional system, these locations will be near transit, will be near disproportionately impacted communities, key community destinations, affordable housing, and trail and park connections. So zooming into the Longmont system, we have a proposed total of 30 e-bikes and 60 docks. So not a lot to begin with. We recognize that. We recognize that we're not going to be able to cover the entire city with 30 e-bikes, but this is what we get with the grant budget. So this is what we are working with. And like I mentioned, we have been working really closely with a lot of internal departments to figure out where is the best place to put these stations. So this is a draft list of some proposed station locations. Again, these came from the vendor, these came from our internal work, these came from the variety of things that I had mentioned previously. They kind of fall into 3 buckets. We have key community destinations, so that would be like the library, the civic center, the museum, the rec center. Downtown, Village at the Peaks, so looking at like commercial access. The fairgrounds, Front Range Community College, and UC Health are not city-owned property, but they are on our list. So those would be 3 locations that we would need to coordinate externally, either with Boulder County or with private entities. Transit connections, as I mentioned, the 8th and Kaufman Park and Ride on our new beautiful Kaufman Street, and then Colorado 119 in Hover for that regional connection to the brand new Colorado 119 bikeway, which is coming soon. And then Greenway connections, recognizing that those connections connect folks to, our city and east and west, great connections. So St. Vern Greenway, Dry Creek, and then potentially Sandstone Ranch. Again, these are all draft locations that we are currently in the process of vetting with our vendor and our internal departments. We did also reach out to our friends over at Bicycle Longmont, and they kind of helped us think about some of these locations and some potential other locations as well. Some considerations when we're looking at station locations, like I mentioned, we are really wanting the majority of these station locations to be on right-of-way, city-owned property. That makes the permitting process a lot easier. There are a few locations that I just mentioned that would be on private property, so we're hoping to get in touch with those owners. It just makes it it just adds a step. It makes it a little bit more difficult, especially if those private property owners are hard to reach. And our goal is to get these bikes on the ground, as soon as possible. So we're hoping that choosing right of way makes the process go rather quickly. We do need to consider the visibility of stations. We want these stations to be highly visible to folks that are walking, biking, driving on the bus. You can see where these B-cycle stations will be. I already talked about prioritizing areas that connect to key community destinations. We're also looking at what are the areas that serve several different key destinations, or what are the areas that serve transit, housing, and commercial, like a combined areas. So what are those low-hanging fruits? And again, just really want to reiterate that unfortunately, the system just cannot cover the entire city with our 30 bikes. That's due to the funding limitations of the grant, the fact that we have to split the $1.5 million between all the partners. And so this is hopefully just a pilot phase or a phase 1 launch, and we can hopefully find more sustainable sources of funding and grow the program in the future. But for now, we're really trying to prioritize those areas, like I said, that connect to several of those overlapping transit, housing, and commercial. So looking ahead, like I mentioned, right now we are in the throes of wrapping up our partner IGAs. We do have 3 of the 5 partners finalized. Community Solutions has kicked off their marketing plan, so they are working with all the partners on potential branding, marketing, and community outreach. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, so I apologize, but the idea is that the bikes and the stations will launch in a phased approach. So each of the partners, all the partners are not launching at the same time. Not everyone will get bikes on the ground at the same time. The intention is that Longmont will be the first to go as the kind of lead applicant and as the most ready. So our ideal time frame is to get the bikes on the ground in July. That is pending some other details that we just need to figure out with the state, but that is our ideal timeline, is this summer. And then Superior and Westminster will probably be shortly after us, later in the summer. And then our partners over at Boulder County and Broomfield will be later, probably next summer or even later than that. So phased approach, not everyone gets bikes on the ground at the same time, but that was the intention. That's how we wrote the grant application. That's how the feasibility study said it would go. So that is not anything new. And then the grant expires at the end of December of 2028. So for quick lessons learned, as I mentioned at the beginning, there was a lot, and I cannot stress that enough, a lot of planning work that we had to do with the group. And so hindsight's 2020, I think we all recognize that a good next step perhaps would have been applying for a planning grant instead of an implementation grant, but we did apply for an implementation grant. So we had to squeeze kind of planning and implementation in a time frame that was really only meant for implementation. Just being clear with our communication with the group, figuring out group dynamics. It is a large group. I don't believe the Transportation Planning Department has ever had a grant this large with 5 municipal partners and 2 other partners. So, just figuring out how that works and how to navigate those challenges. And then, of course, we do have quite a few requirements that the grant outlines that we just have to abide by because it's in our IGA with the state. So that does add just an extra layer of administrative work, of planning, and of considerations. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Kaylee. That's a very, yeah, a very exciting project. So also a lot of work to implement. So any questions from other board members?
Thanks for the update. That's a very ambitious project. I have one question. Riding the bikes will be fee-based, right? The riders will pay a fee. Will the fee be set to raise revenue to allow the system to expand, or will future expansion rely solely on additional grant funding?
Yeah, that's a great question. So B-Cycle will be setting the user fees. I believe they'll be really similar, if not the same, to the user fees that they have in Boulder. So we don't have a say in what those user fees will be like. In terms of will it be reinvested into the project, I think that depends on how much revenue we get from those fees. I am anticipating that the revenue from the user fees will be a lot less than the revenue or than what is spent on the project. So I believe that B-Cycle has mentioned the idea of getting sponsorships for sustainable funding in terms of what organizations or companies are in Longmont that might be interested in employee memberships. Those are kind of bigger packages that would be more expensive, and that would go a long way into making sure that we have a sustainable revenue source, or just advertising sponsorships, things like that. So to answer your question, I believe B-Cycle is leaning more towards getting additional revenue in the form of sponsorships or another grant or other sources rather than just the user fees.
Thanks.
I have a couple, and then you can go. Question is kind of the, so we're getting 30 bikes, 60 docks. What is our share of the cost compared to the other communities?
Yeah, sorry, I should have included that. So we based the grant split by the however many docks each municipal was getting, what percentage of the 190 docks that was. And so Longmont's is the largest share. I don't remember off the top of my head like what percentage of that is, or what the actual. Yeah, it's proportional to the number of docks. So, like, for example, the town of Superior, I think, is getting, like, don't quote me on this, but, like, 15 e-bikes and 30 docks. And so theirs is proportional to, like, 30 divided by 190, where ours is proportional to 60 divided by 190.
Okay. Do we have a estimate of what it costs per 10 docks or any sort of calculation for expandability is what I'm getting to?
Yeah, so B-Cycle gave us like what it costs per e-bike and what it costs per dock, but they gave it to us based on 110 e-bikes and 190 docks. Like they gave us that price based on the regional system. I believe that price kind of changes as you look at like the system as a whole in terms of like operating costs. Like that would change if we had 400 e-bikes versus 200. So we tried to get like a specific like cost per dock and cost per bike from B-Cycle, and they were trying to explain to us that they couldn't give us that specific number because it is dependent on like the size of the system.
Okay. And then I saw kind of end goal being 2028. Obviously, hopefully it's well used and we can expand it more. But I'm assuming we're also thinking of First and Main. They'll kind of start 2029. I'm thinking, and then 28.
28 as well.
And then,
Sorry.
hopefully the sugar mill at some point in the near future. 68. Okay. But then have we also thought about other kind of private developments? Like I know kind of the idea is the easy way road is the public right of way, but what about getting funding also? Maybe don't know that this is more of I would say Councilor Popkin's question is incentives for other developments to have a docking and they pay for it within the system.
Yeah. So kind of two things there. So yeah, like I mentioned, like UC Health Long's Peak Hospital is on that list of potential locations. So utilizing our TMO partners to reach out to those private property owners or companies and asking if they're interested, and kind of, the TMOs are the experts in those business outreach. That's what they do. So leveraging our TMOs and commuting solutions. And then as you all are aware, we did apply for and were awarded funding for implementation of a transportation demand management policy for new development and redevelopment. So looking at what are the opportunities to include either a fee or infrastructure, or what that might look like to help support bike share on private property. So I think that the TDM ordinance is a great opportunity to do just that.
Okay, I think so as well. I'll leave it to Popkin now.
You can ask everything you want, Chair. I will try to stay focused here, but Kaylee, I'd love to follow up with you and talk about kind of the rollout of this. I've seen bike shares implemented in a couple places. First question. So because B-Cycle already provides the service for Boulder, if someone takes their bike from our dock to Boulder, can they integrate and park there?
Yes.
So okay, great. And is there a world where all of our bikes end up in Boulder?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a fair question, because we've been talking about that, especially with Sundance.
Yeah.
So B-Cycle does what's called like system rebalancing.
Sure.
So they do have like data on where the bikes are starting and ending trips. They can see where bikes are in real time. And so if they see that, 30 bikes from Longmont,
So they'll
ended up
take
in
their
Boulder,
van around and collect at
Correct.
a certain frequency depending
Yes.
on what the data shows. Great.
Yes.
Can you briefly explain why the IGAs were so challenging? Like we know the city knows how to do IGAs, and I presume this was largely a copy and paste. So I'm not challenging. I recognize it's a lot of entities, but I'm just curious, like what made this particularly challenging?
Particularly challenging on two fronts. One, just the number of sheer IGAs, because we're the fiscal agent, right? We have to have individual contracts with each of the partners, right? Which means we're reimbursing all of our municipal partners first, and then we're seeking reimbursement at the state. So instead of it just being us alone seeking a reimbursement, or the community, another community themselves seeking a reimbursement, right? It all has to be funneled through us and then funneled through the state. So this is the first time the City of Longmont has taken on a project like this, where we are essentially
Sub-granting,
absorbing the
basically.
risk.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we are the only one under contract with the state. So we have the TMO subcontract, the regional partner subcontract, and then the vendor subcontract. So the amount of work this lovely woman has done with legal, with financing, with procure, all of that has been so much to be in this position of being the fiscal agent as well as a project partner. It is so much more complicated than just your own grant with a funder. So we are essentially acting as a bank while also being a partner, and all of the legal contracts and legal ease that's required to do this is much more complicated than a direct recipient.
Thank you, Kemi. Kaylee, in terms of outreach to private property owners, just building on the chair's questions, was there like a robust effort on that, or like were you really focused on let's get the pilot done and we'll see kind of how we embrace that private sector outreach going further?
Yeah, so in full disclosure, like I mentioned, this is an implementation grant. So
Yeah.
the state was expecting us to have bikes on the ground like this time last year.
Sure.
And so we are kind of under a tight deadline to get bikes on the ground. So we focused on city-owned right-of-way. Yeah.
Totally get that. I'm just taking notes for myself to implement. Okay. And then the front range station is interesting to me, I guess, because this is a pilot through 2028. The fact that even tomorrow we're discussing a front range community college campus relocation to the First Domain area, that's more of a 2028, 2029 timeline anyway. So I guess that makes sense. I guess maybe more of my question is what happens to the dock stations once they are deployed, like at the end of the pilot, at the end of the grant funding?
Yeah, so like to your first point about Front Range Community College moving, like I mentioned, these docks are super easily like flexible configuration wise, and B-Cycle can move them really easily. So
Interesting.
let's say that they're looking at their data and we notice that the stations in front of the rec center is like not getting the anticipated use. They could easily pick that up and move those docks somewhere else. So it's relatively flexible in that way, which is great. So if we notice that the use in whatever location is not getting, we can change. And for Front Range Community College, since they're actually moving locations, can change that. In terms of like what happens to the infrastructure, so the city does not own any of the infrastructure, any of the e-bikes, any of the docks. It is B-Cycle that owns that. So at the end of the grant period, if we don't have like a sustainable source of funding and B-Cycle decides that they can no longer sustain the program or operate in Longmont, then it would just no longer, it would cease to exist.
Got it.
I will add that the intention with all the grant partners is to obviously look for sustainable funding and grow phase 2 and look at private, partnerships. Like the whole region is already committed to what would it look like beyond. No one wants to start this just to see this go away.
Great.
So
I've already been
intention
thinking about
there.
some policy ideas for this too, so I won't overcomplicate the conversation right now, but happy to discuss with any, I guess, well, I don't want to violate open meetings here, but at least happy to discuss with staff and plant some seeds that maybe can come back to TAB for some feedback as well. Maybe the last question I will ask, since it's very germane to what this board was just discussing over the last few months, is the short-term bike parking policy. And I'm curious, I don't want to overcomplicate this, and I know this is a policy question, but if the option for deployment of bike parking was either short-term bike parking or an e-bike station at certain areas, I'd be curious if that would help us scale deployment, recognizing that we'd have to figure out whether they are leasing the infrastructure or paying for it. There'd be that little complication wrinkle versus installing permanent infrastructure. Happy to take that offline if it's a deeper conversation, but I just wanted to plant that seed since we are actively looking at a policy right now. That's all. Just planting the seed. I will end by saying I've lived in a city with a robust bike share before. I love it. Docked bike shares are like one of my favorite multimodal solutions, so I'm really excited for this. I will definitely be taking it around. I've used the one in Boulder before, and look forward to trying this one out too. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Kaylee. We have no action items tonight, so comments from board members, and we can go with all the way to the left, board member Palmino.
Yeah, Cammie, I couldn't remember. Is that Vision Zero Task Force, is that a monthly occurrence?
It is, and the next one is actually happening this Thursday at the Senior Center if anyone is interested in going.
Okay, and I was wondering, is that
Oh, no, sorry, it's not monthly. It's every 2 months.
every 2 months?
Yes,
Okay.
so I apologize. Yeah, so it's on the even months throughout the year.
Yeah, and maybe I wonder do we have that update on that task force as a standing agenda item for the tab then, or is that something?
We do not have it as a standing.
Okay.
We don't have really any standing agenda items for a tab.
Okay. A frequent, or at least a periodic update, I think would be helpful in sort of following up on board members McInerney's
Yeah.
comments earlier.
So we'll
I think
definitely, we've definitely come on a regular basis and we'll continue to do that through staff updates or
Okay.
formal or informational items throughout the year. Yeah.
Okay, great.
And it will definitely, you'll see more and more of it now that we are, in the process of releasing our RFP and getting consultants
Yeah.
to wrap it up. You'll hear a lot more about it more frequently
Okay.
because we're able to really
There's more.
bring it to completion here sooner rather than later since the funding did come through.
Okay.
Oh, sure. Hi.
I'm going to interject for a second. Just to clarify, because I think this gets confused a lot, the task force is a volunteer group of community members. They're not making decisions. So I'm happy to provide staff updates, but typically we're updating them about the work that we're doing. And sometimes they're providing feedback or input, or we're doing some level of engagement with that group, but they're not a decision-making body. They're not an official board or commission of the city. We are, through the action plan process, going to have a steering committee, which will be more like a technical advisory group of city staff. So there might be more things to update you about what the conversations in that are occurring versus the things happening at the task force. Because that's typically where we're often going to them with information about things we're doing, and sometimes we're requesting input or feedback back from them. Thanks.
All right, Board Member Zortman.
Okay. Well, this has been very interesting tonight. Budget is always mind-boggling, quite frankly. So everything has been very, very good. And thanks to everybody.
Board Member McInerney.
As always, thank you for the presentations and information.
Can I just second everyone? No, yes, thank you. I am excited for the neighborhood traffic mitigation program as we dive more in depth on that. Ben, I'm excited for the bike ordinance coming. So, but yeah, also I hope the CFO, we never heard an update about her home. Is everything okay from the fire?
That's very correct. As far as I know, yes.
Okay.
But
All right. Great.
I can relay that back to her.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Now comments from council member.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for filling in today. Got two updates here. One, I believe council, Kim, you can correct me on the timeline, but I believe council will be hearing an update either late this month or early July on the e-bike e-moto policy updates. And I presume that will come to tab.
Yeah. With the
as
change
well
of
for
the
awareness?
June meetings,
Yeah.
that update is now officially slated for July 14th.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great. So July 14th, we have that moving forward. To my knowledge, we are also already piloting some of the education and enforcement efforts as well, but we'll wait to share some of that at a later date.
That's correct. Yeah.
So just sharing that for the board's awareness. And then another update on the board for the board's awareness. This Wednesday, right? That's the 10th. Yeah, this Wednesday, RTD will be meeting to consider the recommendation to create the service for the bus to the airport from Longmont, with a proposed launch for September if it's approved. It's recommended for approval, but it has not been formally approved yet. The plan is to have hourly service, I believe, from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And the exact route, other than starting in Longmont and ending at the airport or vice versa, is still being finalized. So just wanted to provide that update. I believe the proposed station location in Longmont is Kaufman and 8th, right? The Park and Ride by Roosevelt. So a bit relatively central for folks coming from the northwest, northeast, and from the south of Longmont. So there is not much more information available in the packet, but if you were curious, you can look at the RTD agenda packet. It's listed as the AL route, airport to Longmont.
So that information just came out today, which is
Yeah.
why we didn't have a chance to make a update about it. So
yes,
but
AL is in airport Longmont route. Yep. I
similar to the AB for Airport Boulder. So that's it's following the same naming convention.
Yes. So look for Al.
Yeah. How creative.
Yes. Anyway, thank you. I think that's everything on my end, unless someone had a question for me. I'll keep the mic on.
Oops. I just deleted you.
Would there be long-term parking available at 8th and Kaufman?
Yeah, so that's at the Kaufman Park and Ride by Roosevelt already. So there's both there should be long-term and ish parking there already. It's a pretty decent parking lot. And you also have the secure bike shelter that's already there. All right, that's right next to that, if I recall correctly.
So what I might suggest is that we talk about this next month when we'll have the details and we'll know what the board is recommending or approving. And we have slated when we're talking about maybe the next proposed agenda items, if we want to roll right into that, is we've invited our RTD board directors to come next month. So while this is pitched on paper, none of it is confirmed yet. So I don't want us to get too far ahead of the game until we know exactly what is actually on deck, even though we know we're getting a service and we know it's grant funded. and they have
Very-
put on
very-
paper their proposal, but until it's,
Very, very understandable. I think we're just very
Yeah.
excited.
it is exciting. It's very much great
I
news.
need an airport bus tomorrow. So.
That you won't have.
Literally.
You
So-
won't, yeah, you're the only one who's excited or feels the same way.
I suggest getting your way to the 36 and Flatirons Crossing area,
All right.
where you can pick it up for cheap. Yeah, if you do have questions, but the proposed location, according to the packet, is 8th and Kaufman. If you haven't checked out that place recently, that's the parking lot just north of the the rec center that's there and just east of the ice pavilion. So feel free to check that out. Take a look at the offerings that we already have there, so you can understand what you're walking, biking, or driving to pick up the bus.
Okay. Items for
Yeah.
next
so-
agenda.
So just building off of that, right now, new members are slated to start in July. This is what I'm going to caveat, is that we might have to play with our July, August, September plans a little bit. In the event council doesn't get them approved in time, they canceled their last meeting of the month in June, so it's kind of thrown off council's agendas. So if your new board member can't start in July, we would need to have that onboarding and welcome meeting in August, which is where we currently have your study session, because we are assuming we're having a regular session and onboarding in July. So we might have to flip-flop and play with that. But right now, we have a new member welcome on board, RTD board members as well, coming and doing a presentation, potentially some more details about the neighborhood traffic mitigation program, possibly an update on that PZR document that Ben is creating and working with the P&Z team with. So those are what we have on deck for next month, unless we need to flip-flop based on the fact that we don't have our new board member. With August being slated for your first study session, if we could keep it there, and then September would follow up with other potential topics such as
Yes.
maybe traffic mitigation or maybe Vision Zero. So we've got some of the other topics you've all identified slated to come back in September.
So does this significantly ruin kind of the rest of the year schedule if there's all of a sudden some flipping?
Well, we're realizing that if we flip it again, it means our two planned study sessions are ending up really close
Yeah.
together. And with all the topics that you all wanted to cover we might have to revisit if 2 study sessions this year makes sense with the
Yeah.
way just the cookies crumbled this year. And do we want to repurpose the second study session and to be able to cover the number of topics that we'd like to bring to you and that you have asked to hear from us. So we may have to reconsider a second study session.
Okay.
So if we do keep a study session in August, what we might do is next month is then say if we had to pick, what topic would you prioritize your study session for out of the 2 in case we only do get 1 this year? And right now you had identified kind of the standards as one study session, and I believe it was roundabouts as like a second topic. So we can play with that, up for discussion. But right now you're slated for August being the standards, kind of MUTCD, NACDO, ASHTO. How do those things come into play, and how are we using those resources within the city of Longmont?
Yep. So then I just encourage a counselor, get these new people in. All right. Well, this concludes the meeting. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I move the motion to adjourn.
Got a second? Anyone?
I second the motion.
All right. All in favor? Aye.
Thank you, everybody.